They dubbed it a Ronson for its ability to ignite on the first strike. For the soldiers in Sherman tanks during World War II, this nickname was no laughing matter. It was a death sentence. The M4 Sherman was indeed fast, dependable, and economical to produce, but it turned into a coffin on wheels. Its thin armor and towering silhouette made it a prime target. Its weaponry fell short against formidable German Tigers or Panthers. When struck, divine intervention was the sole hope for the crew inside. The horrific scent of burning flesh and the horrifying screams of comrades trapped in molten steel were too common. These tragedies became routine. Yet, countless young Americans rolled into hell inside those tanks, aware that their chances of survival were worse than those of the infantry beside them. This isn't merely the tale of a flawed war machine. It's also the story of the men who believed it would shield them, only to perish inside it. Today, we face a grim reality: why Sherman tank crews were effectively doomed to die. Marketed as a miracle of modern warfare, the M4 Sherman was affordable, fast, and easy to mass produce. Developed in the early 1940s, it was America's response to armored warfare. Military leaders assured it would conquer the battlefield. However, that assurance would become ashes for thousands imprisoned within. From the outside, the Sherman appeared formidable, measuring nearly 20 feet long, equipped with a 75mm main gun and housing up to 5 crew members working closely together. It could reach speeds of 30 miles per hour and was renowned for its reliability. But chillingly, that reliability came at a deadly price. In their rush to produce tanks by the thousands, United States engineers sacrificed quantity for survivability. German tanks like the Tiger and Panther were crafted to kill. Shermans were engineered merely to roll off the assembly line. Former Sherman crewman Belton Y. Cooper expressed it simply: "We lost 648 tanks in combat, but Germans lost about 100 in the same timeframe." It's evident which side had the superior tank. To the 88mm cannons on German vehicles, the Sherman's armor was laughable. American strategy focused on mobility and flanking. But what occurs when no room for maneuver exists and the enemy spots you first? The weakened turret ring and armor, only 50mm thick in various places, rendered it vulnerable. Ammunition stored along the hull's sides was unprotected. Unlike Soviet tanks with diesel engines, every Sherman became a rolling inferno when hit. The crew understood this harsh reality. Each time the engine roared to life, they knew they might be stepping into their own crematorium. Yet, the US Army maintained that the Sherman was sufficiently effective, asserting that victory would come through numbers. They insisted it didn't need to be the best, only better than nothing. But try explaining that to a 19-year-old gunner watching their best friend turn to ash in the turret alongside him. When Allied forces landed at Normandy on D-Day, Shermans were a prominent feature. Over 1,500 arrived in the initial waves, intended to lead the charge. However, as the first Shermans lumbered off the Higgins boats and onto the beaches, the myth of their prowess began to unravel. German bunkers, anti-tank artillery, and treacherous minefields awaited. The Normandy terrain was a nightmare for armored vehicles. Amid the hedgerows of the French landscape, Sherman tanks became sitting ducks. Thick foliage and narrow roads provided German Panthers the advantage, allowing them to ambush American tanks with ruthless precision. Crews resorted to improvisation, welding metal rhino horns onto their vehicles to plow through the hedges. However, that wasn't enough. The German 88mm shells ripped through Sherman armor as if it were paper. just one hit was sufficient. Flames erupted instantly, men screamed. Some perished immediately, while others weren't so fortunate. A crewman wrote home in 1944, "We found a Sherman the other day. The hatch was blown open. Inside were just bones charred black. I don't know their names, but I know how they must have suffered." And that's enough. Even with Shermans outnumbering the enemy 5 to 1, often the kill ratio inverted. It took 5 or 6 Shermans to down a single Tiger, and frequently, 3 of those were flames before the German beast even received a scratch. The Germans mockingly dubbed it Tommy Cookers, implying the tank roasted its British and American crews like meat. Yet, commands continued to flow: keep advancing, keep pushing. Commanders reassured crews, claiming air support would level the playing field. But in the dense hedges, air cover became ineffective. It became steel against steel, and the Sherman consistently fell short. Understanding why Sherman crews were effectively signed to death requires insight into the tank's interior: cramped, sweltering, and deafening. The tight space cramped even the tallest men. The gunner's position felt like a metallic coffin. Once sealed, escape was nearly impossible. With ammunition densely packed along sides, beneath feet, and behind seats, there was no blast shielding. A single shot from a Panzer or Tiger resulted in an internal explosion. Ammunition would cook off in a devastating chain reaction, engulfing all within seconds. Veteran tank gunner Frank J. Levesque recalled, "Upon impact, it sounded as though God had slammed a sledgehammer against a steel drum." Flames erupted everywhere. I remember the driver screaming. Just screaming. Then silence. Exiting became nearly impossible. Hatches jammed from impacts. Flames consumed the air, and the explosion could kill you. If not, smoke would finish the job. Crews were taught to remain sealed inside to evade small arms fire. But when your tank ignites, those same hatches morph into a death trap. Combat wasn't the only thing threatening them. Mechanical failure, friendly fire, and landmines were constant dangers. Crews lived in relentless fear with frayed nerves. They were trained to trust the machine, but deep within, they feared it would betray them when pushed. Some crews lined their tanks with sandbags, hoping for improvised protection. Others rearranged their ammunition, attempting to delay a fatal fire just long enough to escape. The reality was that Sherman crews weren't merely fighting the Germans, they were battling their own equipment, a combat no soldier should ever have to face. The German Tiger I tank was a nightmare incarnate. Weighing over 60 tons, its 88mm cannon could penetrate a Sherman's armor from over 2,000 meters. This was far beyond the effective range of the Sherman. The Sherman's shots might harmlessly bounce off the Tiger's formidable front plate, while the Tiger could annihilate its target in a single thunderous blow. This wasn't speculation. This was a stark mathematical reality of survival, or rather, destruction. The Tiger was engineered for supremacy. Its firepower, armor, and optics greatly outclassed the Sherman's capabilities, and the Germans understood this. In one of the war's most damning accounts, German tank ace Michael Wittmann single-handedly obliterated an entire lineup of Shermans and other vehicles at Villers-Bocage in June 1944. British Shermans stood no chance. They were arranged like tin ducks at a carnival, falling one by one to the blaze of a single Tiger. In response, American strategies shifted direction. Rather than confront the Tiger directly, they attempted to overwhelm it. It meant sending 5 or 6 Shermans in a charge, trying to distract it long enough for a side shot. That was the strategy, more men willing to risk their lives. And it wasn't solely about the Tiger. The Panther, lighter and faster but almost equally lethal, became more common. Armed with a high-velocity 75mm gun, it effortlessly shredded Sherman armor. The Panther's sloped armor deflected incoming fire, while the Sherman's boxy design invited penetration. Ironically, a significant portion of the tank killing was not even conducted by other tanks, but by German anti-tank artillery like the Pak-40, which pierced Shermans as though through butter. One US commander remarked, "Our tanks are like glass, beautiful to behold, but they shatter upon impact." For many Sherman crews, encountering a Tiger or Panther didn't signal a tough battle. It foreshadowed inevitable death. The fortunate might escape in time, while the unfortunate vanished amid fire and steel. Describing the experience inside a hit Sherman is challenging because those who survived largely remained silent about it. Many who didn't never had the chance to share their stories. When a Sherman was struck by a high-velocity shell, it didn't always lead to immediate death. Sometimes, it resulted in a slow burn. Flames crawled across the floor, melting uniforms and charring flesh. Smoke quickly filled every corner. There was no fresh air, no light, only noise, chaos, and agony. Former driver Joseph Ball recounted witnessing a nearby Sherman hit. "I saw the turret lid pop open like a jack in the box, flames shooting out. A man attempted to escape but was already engulfed in flames. He never made it out." Inside, temperatures could soar past 1000 degrees Fahrenheit. Ammunition detonated in secondary explosions. Shrapnel ricocheted like a blender. If the initial blast didn't end your life, the fire likely would. And if you managed to pry open a hatch, assuming it wasn't jammed or blown off, you had to escape through a minuscule opening while the tank burned beneath you and bullets zipped overhead. Crews were aware of these dangers. They heard the tales and witnessed the fallout, yet they climbed in day after day. Some wrote farewell letters, tucking them into their breast pockets. Others made pacts. If one caught fire, the other would shoot them before they screamed. The military attempted to evolve. Later Sherman models incorporated wet stowage for ammunition, encasing shells in water jackets to reduce fire risks. This improvement was helpful, though only minimally. By the time these modifications were widespread, thousands had already perished. These weren't just tank operators, they were boys, farm children, mechanics, and draftees. They didn't enlist to become martyrs, yet inside a Sherman, that's precisely what they turned into. The tragedy surrounding the Sherman isn't merely mechanical, it's ethical. Those in command were aware, they possessed the data. They examined the after-action reports. Yet the orders persisted. American tank doctrine at the time was based on flawed beliefs. One was that tanks shouldn't oppose other tanks, that was the responsibility of tank destroyers. Thus, the Sherman was created to support infantry, not to confront Panthers or Tigers. But war doesn't adhere to manuals. In France, Belgium, and Germany, Shermans repeatedly faced enemy armor, suffering heavy losses. Instead of redesigning the tank or ceasing its deployment, High Command doubled down. Why? Because the Sherman was cost-effective and easy to manufacture. Henry Ford's assembly lines could produce them faster than German factories could create a single Tiger. It became a war of attrition, with Sherman crews as the fuel. Even General George Patton, an esteemed tank commander, once noted in his diary, "The Sherman is inferior. We must build better." However, better never materialized, not swiftly enough. Crews were instructed to count on numbers, flanking, and air cover. But what they truly required was protection, which they were denied. It wasn't until late in the war that American forces introduced the M26 Pershing, finally a tank capable of rivaling German armor. But by that point, the worst had passed, and the blood toll had already been exacted. A subtle resentment brewed among some crews. They didn't harbor hatred towards their officers, yet questioned why they were consistently sent into the fray first, into a meat grinder. Why did their tanks ignite like torches while the enemy's did not? Why did their comrades fail to return? Commanders continued to smile, heralding boys fighting for freedom, repeatedly labeled as heroes, while marching into doom inside machines they understood would not save them. For the surviving Sherman crewmen, the war didn't conclude when the gunfire ceased. Because the true wounds weren't always visible. Veterans returned with skin grafts, amputated limbs, and lungs permanently scarred from smoke inhalation. However, worse than the physical injuries were the haunting memories. One crewman, Melvin Bidd, reflected, "You don't forget the smell. It's not like burning wood or fuel. It's human. And it lodges within you. You smell it in your sleep. It stays with you forever." The trauma of watching friends burn alive, the torment of hearing screams echo inside a steel box, and the frantic struggle for a jammed hatch while the floor melted beneath were buried within and unwanted conversations at home. In post-war America, Sherman tankers faced neglect. There were no major films commemorating their sacrifices, nor statues in public squares. Infantry received accolades. Fighter pilots earned fame. But the tankers were those who fell before becoming heroes. Many resorted to drinking. Others sought jobs keeping them away from loud noises. Some never spoke of the war because voicing it meant reliving the ordeal. For men who had been trapped inside burning coffins, reliving it became unbearable. Wives recalled them as distant. Sons remembered him as silent. It wasn't until decades later that the concept of PTSD gained recognition. By then, many who had climbed into Shermans during World War II had buried the truth alongside too many deceased friends. The Sherman tank didn't merely claim lives, it left survivors haunted by their experiences. Every tanker who returned home carried memories that would never fade. They had survived death, yet it became their constant companion. The US military justified the Sherman's existence through its numbers. American factories produced over 49,000 M4 Shermans during the conflict, more than twice what Germany manufactured across all tank models combined. The rationale was uncomplicated: we don't need the best, we require more. On paper, this approach worked. The Allies triumphed, the Nazis fell. But at what sacrifice? This strategy exacted a brutal toll. Human lives transformed into expendable commodities. It was clear, if it required 5 Shermans to eliminate 1 Tiger, and 3 were lost in the process, the US could withstand that loss. Yet this meant sacrificing 3 crews to certain death to gain a slim tactical advantage. These were not mere statistics, they embodied lives, faces, families. Some veterans perceived the deceit. In his memoir, tanker Richard Riley remarked, "They told us we were winning, but I continually questioned, if we're winning, why are we always the ones dying first?" This belief, that American industry would prevail, created a moral lapse. Shermans weren't built to safeguard lives but to expedite the war. In doing this, thousands of young Americans were condemned to perish within a machine their superiors recognized as inferior. War planners were cognizant of the weak armor, outdated weaponry, and the gas engine that transformed it into a fire risk. But they proceeded regardless, building it not once but tens of thousands of times. Tragically, the Sherman transformed into an icon of victory in historical narratives. It appeared in news footage, triumphantly seated on German soil, hailed as a hero. Yet for those who inhabited it, it was never a hero. It was merely a coffin on treads. We recall the Normandy landings, the liberation of France, and the triumph in Berlin, but we seldom consider the costs incurred to achieve those victories, the broken bodies abandoned within melted hulls along the route. Ultimately, the saga of the Sherman tank transcends flawed design or failed strategies. It's a tale of trust fractured. It's about young men told their equipment would safeguard them, only to perish screaming as they were trapped inside. This story resounds through time, reminding us of the cost of prioritizing victory over human life. The danger of letting production lines replace protection. When we allow our soldiers to be mere statistics rather than sons, brothers, and fathers. Today, few Sherman crew members remain alive. Those who endure seldom discuss their experiences, yet their silence resonates loudly. Their suffering stands as a monument, more profound than any marble statue. It falls upon us to remember them, not as faceless soldiers in old war footage, but as young men who entered a machine they did not trust, obeyed orders they did not question, and paid the ultimate price. If you ever come across a Sherman tank in a museum, take a closer look. Appreciate the tracks and the gun, but also gaze at the hatch. The hatch so many attempted to open during their final moments, the hatch that jammed when the flames came. That hatch signifies more than just metal. It symbolizes everything war demands and everything we owe to the men who ventured within its confines.